Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Climate and Environment 2 panel. We're happy to hear from you today. I was going to kind of quiz myself and make sure I'm getting everybody's name because that's my goal. So I'm going to try Ananya, Lauren, Dami, Jess, Brigid, and Zaya. Yay! And I didn't even have to look. So we'll just turn it over to our panel and we'll get started. All right, great. Handheld?
Yeah, sure. All right. Okay, so this is the infamous clicker that I need to just seeing how okay, it works. All right, so hello, everybody. My name is Ananya Chetia. I'm representing the University of Richmond today. And my project this summer was about how annual floods disrupt students, especially from low income and rural backgrounds, from accessing their schools in my home state of Assam, India. So this photo is a school of Alichuk Lower Primary School. This is a flood from June 2023. And this flood damaged the furniture, walls, soaked all the exam papers, so the ink, kind of went away as well, and took away the rice too, which is, the rice is used as free meals for the students that go there. And as you can see, here's also a boy from the village that is swimming in the flood. That's what the headmaster told me, is that he was swimming, he was safe. So yeah. All right, so Assam consists of various tribal communities. It's a different makeup from the rest of India. So there's a lot of indigenous and tribal communities, often classified as the other backward class in India. That's just the term that the Indian government uses. So I was particularly curious about looking at the Mising tribe. Mising translates to man of water. And this is because this tribal community has been flood adaptive for thousands of years. They're indigenous to this land, and they live right near the Brahmaputra River, which goes through all of Assam. And some ways that they're flood adaptive is, they build houses on bamboo stilts, they build boats, they know how to swim, and even the students commute to classes via boat. But what we've noticed in the last 10 years, actually, is that floods have become unpredictable and spontaneous. So usually floods happen in July and August. And July is a summer holiday, so students don't even have to worry about a flood interrupting them going to school. But what's been happening is that floods are starting as early as May and ending as late as October. So obviously it's going to affect their school calendar. And so what we've noticed is that students miss up to 2 weeks of classes. They catch diseases like malaria, chlorella, diarrhea because of the floodwaters. So abstinence rates remain high. And then that forces the teachers to actually push back their academic curriculum so they don't get to finish everything that they need to teach their students. Oh, and then here are some photos. So I'm smiling here, but I'm freaking out inside because it's muddy and slippery from the rainwater, and a little slip I could fall. And then here's Alichuk Lower Primary School, the school I visited, and here's a photo of auto rickshaws. And if you notice the roads, there are potholes everywhere because of the rainwaters. And the drivers don't wear seatbelts there, so I was so motion sickness, and he was just taking me, and that's the route to school every day. I also reported on Majuli Island, which is the largest river island in the world in Assam, which is pretty cool, and it used to be 1,250 square kilometers. It is now 350 square kilometers, and it has shrunk that much because of flood erosion. The Mising community is also indigenous to this land, and their island and their culture is on the brink of extinction. So I reported on a school here as well. It's called the Hummingbird School. Hummingbird actually represents the students that go there, which I thought was really cute. And the principal was telling me that in 2017, when the floods were 8 feet high, they didn't have access to a toilet. So his students and the villagers there would have to use the boat as a toilet or go to the forest and use the toilet there. So what happened was when the floodwaters dried up, the smell of human and animal feces was stinging so much, they had to wait an additional week to clean up all the human and animal poop from the schools so that students can access their education. And these are things we don't even have to think about, and I wouldn't have known about this if I hadn't talked to him. So I also wanted to incorporate numbers in my story, so every day I had this little Excel sheet. And through the Assam flood report data, I would just calculate how many civilians were affected by floods and how many districts were affected by floods. So through my calculations, we found that July was the most hard-hit month, but it was surprising to see that numbers were high in August and September as well, which is, again, when schools are running. And also, we found from the latest data in 2022 that over 1,000 schools were partially damaged and over 600 schools were completely destroyed. And I've calculated the numbers for us in dollars because this is in Indian rupees. So for the financial damage, it was $5.2 million, and for the recovery costs, it was $6.6 million. Now I want to ask you guys, how much do you think this school got from the state for flood recovery, fees to repair the damages? It received $0. So let me get to that and why. Yeah, so the school received $0, and this is because the school supports a majority Muslim student population, and it's not a tribal school, right? It's just regular students from Assam, or they're Bengali, and they're coming to this school. So they don't fall under India's scheduled tribe list. Because they don't fall under this category, the government is not obliged to help them, but they're still low income and rural and underprivileged. Whereas a Mising school, which is a tribal school, they do receive funding from the government. In fact, a school I visited called the Tamara School was provided an extra water tank which filters out the dirty floodwaters and makes it into clean drinking water or water used for the toilet. So that's interesting that despite these two communities being underprivileged, only one is getting the need from the government. So I did thankfully get to publish this on Mongabay. Mongabay is a climate change publication. Actually, Jane Goodall once said that she reads it, so I'm really excited about that. And the pitching process was long. I pitched this to them in May, and I heard back in July. So that's why I started pretty early. And one interesting thing, I worked with the Mongabay office in India, and they don't use AP style, and as someone who likes the short punchy sentences and not using the Oxford comma, Mongabay India was like, no, we're gonna use long flowery sentences, we're gonna use the Oxford comma. So that was just something that I learned that, different publications throughout the world do phenomenal jobs, but it's different from how it's done in the United States, and that's totally okay. I'm so happy I got to report on my community and my people in Assam, and I got to publish it in an Indian publication for an Indian audience. Indian in the sense that it's in Mongabay, India. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And yeah, that's all there is today. But if you really want to talk about this outside and learn the science behind why flooding happens and more, please feel free to chat. Thanks, guys.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Lauren Fox, and I graduated from Boston University this May, but I am originally from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And it was really my upbringing at this intersection of mountaineering and tourism, and it many times at the mercy of the unpredictable climate, that influenced my curiosity to report on this topic at the extremes in the Himalayas. So for my reporting, I traveled to Manang district of Nepal for 1 month trekking along the Annapurna Circuit Trail, and I actually just returned last week. I wanted to see how climate change was affecting those living at the highest points of the world. I was curious about how local people were adapting to these changes and how the mountaineering and trekking industries that existed there were adapting as well. At what points are the livelihoods, safety, and economic means impacted by changes to the climate to such an extent that people are actually leaving these towns that they've existed in for generations? And another reason that I decided to report in this specific region of Nepal was for a secondary story that I decided to pursue: a short documentary on the limited perspective of female mountain guides. So Nepal's first all-female mountaineering company and trekking company is located in Pokhara, which is the gateway city to the Annapurna region where I would be trekking after. So I spent the first week of my reporting trip in Pokhara, spending time with this all-female trekking group. This was during their biannual training camp, so they'll bring young Nepalese women into the mountaineering industry. And here are some stills from my short documentary that I'm still in the very early process of putting together. And in this photo here, you can actually see that peak is called Fishtail, and it's part of the Annapurna region where I then headed to do my trek and my climate reporting. Oops. So this route that I did, the Annapurna Circuit Trail, is one of the most trekked routes in Nepal. And it's also home to the Gurung ethnic group who have been living there for generations. So I spoke with tea house owners, guest house owners, local governments, nonprofits, pretty much anyone who would speak to me along the trail. And I heard a lot of similar stories. I heard stories of flooded homes, schools, crops, guest houses, and subsequent means of income. And the issue was complicated, but a lot of it came down to one primary shift in the climate. It was raining and snowing at the wrong times and in the wrong places. I heard stories from the tragic 2021 flood where the local school in Tal, which is one of the lower villages in the region, was destroyed. Many of the children had to leave Tal and go to boarding schools in Pokhara or Kathmandu for education. And another older couple in Tal described to me how they had to crawl on their hands and knees to higher ground during this flooding because they were no longer able to walk. And this discrepancy really highlights and is representative of a broader shift in the region. The younger generation doesn't want to work in the tourism trekking sector or in the agricultural industry as their parents once have. And this shift was definitely felt. The schools, or the villages I trekked through, especially lower in the villages, felt very empty. And part of this had to do with a road that was built in 2008 to promote trekking and transportation of goods to the higher towns in the valley. But this meant that trekkers weren't wanting to walk on the road in the lower villages and would instead take jeeps up to begin their trek. So what I was finding was that the lives of those living in the Himalaya are so deeply intertwined with climate. And a lot of these changes to the environment are found higher up in the valley and lower up in the valley. But and while these changes might be different, a big constant is people are leaving the valley. So this was the route that I was trekking. So Tal here is where I began my trek and where the story I just described came from. And these were the villages that I would stay at each night during my trek. And I actually made it up to Tilishu Lake right up there, which is the head of the water source of the Marigansi River that flooded Tal. So it was really interesting to follow this water source all the way to the source at the top. Also, one thing to note is these are all in meters. So elevation was also a big thing. I made it up to almost 20,000 feet, which was amazing, but that was another challenge, was just lung capacity. I also made it up to Throngla Pass, which is the highest pass in the world, and was able to speak to mountaineers at the Throngla Peak Base Camp and was learning how climate was affecting their work as well. And about 5 days into my trek, I woke up to headlines like this. Well, not actually, because there was no electricity, but this was the headlines that were happening that day. An unprecedented post-monsoon storm had raged through Nepal. And I woke up in a tea house in the village of Nagwale to a white ground and the glassy eyes of its tea house, of the owners. This is Santi and Amar, those owners, on the right there. They watch as their harvest for, They watch as their harvest for the year had been buried under the snow. After months of research and pre-reporting, this story of climate change in the highest points of the world were coming alive in front of my eyes. When it finally cleared enough for us to continue hiking, about 24 hours after being snowed into Nagwale, we were able to continue, my trekking guide and I, to the next village where we had electricity and were able to watch videos of the streets in Kathmandu becoming synonymous with the river. It was the most rain that Nepal had experienced since 2002. But in Manang, at almost 12,000 feet high and above the river level now, there was this false sense of safety. We had blue skies for the days that followed the storm. So ironically, it actually felt safer up here than it did below where the flooding persisted for the days to follow. And this is safer with an asterisk because we definitely had a few scary moments of rock slides and avalanches we could see in the distance. So one of the bigger picture ideas that I found here is that at the highest points of the valley, I was hearing from families who had been in the mountaineering industry for decades, but had banned their grandchildren from climbing because of this increased danger. And then I also heard from families in the lower points of the valley, where crops and trekking trails are destroyed from temperamental snowfall and flooding from the storms. And when I first came to Nepal, I intended for the story to be solutions-based. I was looking for adaptations and wanted to know how these people at the highest points of the world were adapting to climate change, which is an issue, as we've heard a lot this weekend, is affecting almost everywhere in the world. But what I found was that local people are still waiting for a solution. I was both physically and metaphorically in the middle of this storm that reiterated the symbiotic relationship between people living at the highest places in the world and climate. Mud roofs have turned to tin in order to adapt from snow turning to rain, and NGOs track glacial melting to try to monitor the risk of glacial lake floods. But the people living on the ground are almost waiting to be told what to do in the meantime, and many of the young people will leave for the cities. My incredible trekking guide and reporting partner, Tila, explained the ways that the Nepali people categorize mountains in a way that I think really encapsulates the story well. So what many would consider a mountain, towering thousands of feet above, only graduates from the term hill to peak if it's above 7,000 meters or 23,000 feet. And the word mountain is only saved for those above 7,000 meters. And this whole system is complicated by snow. Nothing can be considered a mountain unless there's snow on it. So by these definitions, as snow lines are moving because of a warming Earth, the definitions of what is and isn't a mountain in Nepal changes as well. I wanted to end this off by just thanking the Pulitzer Center. This was truly such an incredible opportunity, and I was pinching myself every day that I was trekking in the Himalayas, being able to tell incredible stories and talk to amazing people. So thank you all so much for listening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Damilola Oduolowu, and I reported on Lagos State's Lagos coastal cities' vanishing mangroves. I've reported several environmental stories in the past, and ranging from plastic pollution to waste management, including solutions like recycling and upcycling. But for this project, I decided to take a different approach to finding the perfect underreported story. And then, I wanted to investigate a critical environmental issue in my home state, Lagos, Nigeria. And then, so I reached out to a renowned environmentalist, Desmond Majakodumi. You're going to see him in a moment. And I asked him earlier this year in March, what do you think is an underreported story about the environment and climate change in Lagos? And he told me, generally, all environmental matters are underreported, but what comes to mind immediately is the mangroves. So he told me that the mangroves are being destroyed at an alarming rate in Lagos. And so I began to research, and I realized how important this issue is. So let me give you a background. Lagos is a coastal city and the most populous city in Africa, with an estimated, population of 22 million people. And Lagos State has a total area of approximately 3,577 square kilometers. And it is also the smallest state in Africa, the smallest state in Nigeria, and then it is the most populous city in Africa. So the lagoons and water bodies constitute about, a quarter of, the total area of Lagos. And then to just give you, context, when you look at places like, Houston, Texas, it's bigger than, in terms of landmass, it's bigger than Lagos. But Lagos Lagos has about 22 million people, and then that's like, even times 10 the population of Houston, Texas. Then islands like Lagos Island, Victoria Island, Ikoyi, Lekki used to be small islands that were mangrove areas in Lagos. But now it has changed. Now, as you can see, all of these areas in that photo right there used to be mangroves, but then they now have like, different buildings and all of that there. So if you're unfamiliar, mangroves are salt-tolerant trees and shrubs that thrive in coastal intertidal zones, forming dense forests along shorelines. They are crucial to coastal communities because they provide protection from storms and erosion and support fisheries. In the fight against climate change, mangroves act as powerful carbon sinks absorbing and storing large amounts of carbon dioxide while also helping to mitigate the impact of rising sea levels. So, why are the mangroves in Lagos vanishing rapidly? So, mangroves are being destroyed at an alarming rate in Lagos to make way for housing, industry, and infrastructure development. And this is a top underreported environmental story in Nigeria as a whole. Now, as you can see in these photos, mangroves are being destroyed over there, just to start to build stuff. Here, right there, you can see houses, there. So it's been used for real estate, industry, and other things. Now, over there, the bottom right, you can see a machine pumping water from the water to the land just to create more land space. It's called dredging, pumping sand from the water to the land. So that's Desmond over there, and he says, a lot of Lagos is mangroves, but particularly Lekki catchment area is mainly mangrove and swamp. There's a bit of an illusion because during the dry season, it's not so obvious. It's not so observable. So like the photo I showed the other time, you would see that, it looks all great, but then you wouldn't really know that, used to be mangrove area, except, maybe when it's time, like the rainy season, and when everywhere is really, really flooded. And then I spoke to this, the second photo over there. I spoke to that fisherman, and he said, and we were standing actually where he used to fish, right? And that was really profound for me. Like, we're on the land, and, it was just where he used to fish. And then this fisherman down there also said that their fathers, they didn't really understand what mangroves are, but they said that their fathers used to, worship mangroves. And I wonder, if their ancestors used to worship mangroves, why are they not protecting them? So my takeaways, most coastal community members whose main source of livelihood is fishing know little or nothing about the importance of mangroves. And then I spoke to the Lagos State government as well. They are aware about the situation, and then they are not doing so much to protect the mangroves. They said there are mangrove protection laws, but it's not being implemented actually. And then due to the unique nature of Lagos, it is important to tackle the problem, right? And education efforts on the importance of mangrove protection, restoration, preservation are being done by NGOs, but they still need more support. So I spoke to different people to just get context of what's happening. I spoke to a professor of marine biology. I spoke to mangrove tour guide and all of that, just to understand the peculiar root causes, the impact, and to just explore the possible solutions. So I had fun while reporting. It was fantastic. As you can see, I had an opportunity to also eat my the local dish and all of that. So it was quite fun. So challenges: getting the Lagos State Government Ministry of the Environment for an interview was not easy at all. So I tried and waited for over a month before I could get someone to speak. And then unexpected moments, rain disrupted for me. I checked, but then it wasn't always accurate. So my return flight was canceled twice. Back to the US, it was canceled twice. So I had to travel to London, and then I flew back to the United States from London 2 days later. So triumphs. So 2 news channels confirmed, and I have a 24-minute TV report for an entire environmental program, and then the duration for the second channel is to be determined. I have 4 radio stations confirmed, 2 out of that confirmed. So I'm going to be doing 15-minute reports in English language, and also I realized that there's need for for it to be done in local languages as well. So while I was reporting, I also recorded in local languages, Pidgin and Yoruba, because I know that these people need to be educated, and most of them don't really understand the English language. And so I also have 1 digital newspaper confirmed. So thank you. If you'd like to connect, that's my card over there. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Okay, sweet. Thanks so much for listening in advance. My name is Jess Savage. I'm a recent graduate from the Northwestern Graduate School of Journalism, and I'm currently a Report for America core member at WNIJ in Illinois. I just got back a couple of weeks ago from northern England, the Yorkshire region, where I studied how traditional sheep farmers in the region are affected by changing conservation trends. And I found through my reporting that there are deep cultural, political, and economic issues that are tied up in this dynamic. So I just was hoping to figure out what those were. So this project is a follow-up from my Medill embedded science reporting project. I spent 5 weeks in January in Skipton and around, basically following a group that restores upland peat bogs in northern England. So they just re-wet the bogs that have been drained. So the history and context of this area is the bogs were drained and ditched by sheep farmers to make room for more sheep farming. The government was incentivizing farmers to increase their herds to boost economic activity after World War II. And they were already using the green valleys that you can kind of see in the background there for sheep farming, so they looked to the boggy uplands for more land. And the tops of these hills are very, very wet ecosystems. They're made up of mostly sphagnum mosses that can hold up to 20 times their weight in water, and they are essential habitats for birds, bugs, bees, all that type of thing. And they are incredible carbon sinks, so when they were drained and ditched, it caused runaway erosion, flooding in the towns below, and just crazy carbon emissions. So the government has since shifted subsidy payments away from increased herds and more towards conservation and nature-friendly farming practices. And when I was there in January, we learned a lot about how the farmers were, their role in the degradation, but I didn't get to talk to any farmers, and I wanted to see how they are specifically impacted by or even involved in restoration efforts. So I talked to small family farms, large farmers, and wealthy private estates alike. Talked to a lot of different people, mainly ecologists, grazing researchers, current and former farmers. I went to several sheep auctions. I talked to conservation practitioners and wealthy estate managers who are rewilding their land. This is the Muffet family. This is 3 generations of farmers. They take care of hundreds of sheep in the day and as well as goats and 4 sheepdogs, 1 retired, 1 baby, 2 working ones. And at this day they were preparing 6 sheep to go to a pedigree auction, which is just, they take the best of their best sheep. And I helped as best as I could, but mostly just passing equipment and holding the sheep in place while it was getting trimmed and washed and all that. So the Muffets are really frustrated by conservation processes or conservation trends. And Brian, the father, remembers when they were being incentivized for larger sheep herds, and now Carol has to kind of shift the farm to become more nature friendly. And they also feel like the government is really jerking them around with the different changing subsidies. I also went to private estates that are making use of conservation subsidies. I'm so sorry about this photo. This is the Broughton estate. For centuries, the Tempest family has rented land to intensive sheep farmers, but in the past 3 years, they've completely changed their practices, rebranded as a sanctuary, and are currently rewilding their landscape. And rewilding is basically just trying to put nature back in the driver's seat and humans are kickstarting natural processes to heal the landscape and restore damaged ecosystems. So Kelly Hollick is the rewilding project manager at Broughton, and she was pointing to these iconic rolling green hills and compared them to deserts. They are managed for a few varieties of grass that sheep like, and then sheep themselves. And they are very quiet. When you're walking through these lawns, it's you can't hear bugs and there's no habitat for other species. And sheep are nibbling grass down to a really short nub. So They have planted hundreds of thousands of early succession trees, reintroduced beavers, and now they're replacing sheep with cows and wild boars, which graze differently and create habitat for other species. Okay. And so I wanted to point out that while there's like a tension between these methods, everyone that I talked to was really passionate and like they cared so much about the land and they just wanted to care for it in the best way that they knew how. And I talked to a former sheep farmer named Matt, who now is connecting other farmers to funding and other business supports. And he said he just was describing how deep the culture really goes and how the region is tied to these traditional methods. This is a quote from him. In lots of the language in the north of England, the dialect, it's all linked to sheep farming, and particularly that kind of regional upland sheep farming, it's all very special. And I think there's a fear that we're slightly losing it. As sheep get removed from the moors, there's a loss of that culture. But at the same time, like, it's important to acknowledge the loss of biodiversity when we manage for a few species of grass that sheep like. Kelly said that they use like an old promotional photo of the rolling hills as a before picture now. And this is another quote from her. She said, "It's that classic England green and pleasant lands. Well, England shouldn't be green. It should be a mix of greens and yellows and browns and beiges." So through my reporting, I couldn't really point to, I couldn't really point to who's doing it right or wrong. I just kind of wanted to point out that there are different ways of approaching one landscape. And trying to illustrate how people are thinking about these changes in a country that's extremely resistant to change. Just to sum up, farmers are really vulnerable to changing government subsidies, and they're worried about losing land, funding, and culture. And conservationists are worried about how vulnerable England is to climate change because it's one of the least biodiverse nations in the world. I think that there's really a room for both approaches. A balance of farming and conservation can preserve both nature and the culture of the region. And this is just a photo of me getting some audio. I've since done these 2 interviews, and I'm hoping to, I haven't produced my story for Pulitzer yet, but hoping to do text and audio for my newsroom as well. Thank you. Thank you. Goodness, so much tech up here, pardon me. The infamous clicker, like Ananya said. Okay, great. Hi, my name's Brigid. I'm the Pulitzer Fellow from Davidson College, and I'm a senior this year. This past summer, I investigated protests against tourism amidst the critical drought period in the Canary Islands. I spoke with scientists, locals, strikers. I tried to speak with developers, and I'm excited to share my findings. All photos in this presentation are mine. Will that stay there? Except for this one, which I got from an academic article. Okay, so during the Pulitzer Fellows orientation that we all went to, hopefully, this past summer, I was in a group where environmental journalist Gustavo Falero spoke to us, and he told me a piece of advice I will never forget, which is that the job of environmental journalism is to tell the story of a place. And so I wanted to start with that. I didn't know about the Canary Islands, what the Canary Islands even was, until January of last year when I had to do a project on the dialect for my linguistics class. And I wanted to sort of give a brief introduction about the place because Americans do not frequent the Canary Islands. It's a very popular tourist destination for British, German, even Spanish, like mainland Spain tourists, and for greater Europe, but I found that even my parents didn't know, couldn't point it out on the map. So with that, a brief but very important introduction. The Canary Islands is a volcanic island chain off the west coast of the continent of Africa. It was conquered by Spain in the 15th century. Before that, it was previously inhabited by the indigenous Guanche population. It became the gate that connected Spain to the Caribbean and to wider Latin America, allowing Spanish to flow from mainland Spain to all over the world where it is currently spoken. People in the Canary Islands, like I alluded to a second ago, speak their own dialect. It sounds and functions like a combination of Caribbean Spanish, Andalusian Spanish, and Latin American Spanish. It was very cool.
I'm about to talk about this, but I'm an English major and a Hispanic Studies minor. I wanted to go somewhere where I was able to connect with the Spanish-speaking community, and I often found that through the language, I was able to learn a lot about the culture. Okay, fun fact, environmentally, the islands are subtropical, but they're made up of microclimates. Each one, you can drive like 10, 15 minutes in any direction, and the temperature will be different, and it might be raining where it wasn't. But I will say, I don't mean to make it sound like it's raining all the time. In the last 4 years alone, tendencies have shown that the island's climate is veering toward higher rates of evaporation, lower rates of rainfall, up to like a 40% decrease on average, and in general, higher temperatures in an already very dry, arid climate. There's a lot of also desert influence. I'm not a scientist, but I learned a lot. Okay, so how did I find this place if I didn't even know what it was like a year ago? I'm an English and Hispanic Studies student, like I just mentioned, and I grew up in a touristy area. When thinking about this incredible reporting fellowship opportunity, I knew I wanted to pick a project that would allow me to connect with the Spanish-speaking community, and I took a special interest in complications around tourism as someone who grew up in the Jersey Shore, sort of seeing the economic and environmental impact of people that come and go. In early 2024, I saw that olive oil prices were on the rise, interestingly, just because of critical and increasing drought conditions. But then later on in 2024, around April, I guess that was 2023. In 2024, in April, there was a march in the capital city of the Canary Islands, and 100,000 people rushed the streets to protest tourism. And that was the work of a coalition of different activist organizations and government organizations. It's a lot of different people were involved trying to make change. And then an organization that participated in that manifestation began a hunger strike. And those headlines were everywhere in UK media, and I was astounded. So I wanted to go. My project explores the connections between environmental factors and socioeconomic factors, which is made really, really complicated by the Canary Islands as a place with a lot of interest in foreign development. So why are so many people interested in developing at the Canary Islands from far away? Basically, development is made really easy by government policy. Foreign developers receive free repatriation of all profits and only 4% taxes. One of my sources, Sharon Backhouse, she works at a science communication company, she summed it up like this: that's unheard of. It means the Canary Islands get all their fabulous spaces cemented over, these huge mini villages get built, and all the profits leave. A lot of frustration has been simmering about political priorities toward business development. All the while, quality of life is worsening for locals. What does that look like? It looks like increased traffic. It looks like sewage in the ocean. It looks like the fact that rent has increased 200% in the last 10 years, all the while salaries have stagnated. Effectively, locals are getting pushed out of their homes, by prices that only international visitors and international residents can afford. Unfortunately, there's been a real lack of acknowledgement from the government related to these claims, these complaints, and these systemic issues. Canary Gota went on strike for 20 days, trying to basically advocate for citizen participation. Among many claims, they were like, we really want our voices to be participant in government decisions. We want a citizen committee. The government did not respond to any of these claims, and there's been a lot of simmering frustration that their interests lie in supporting these developments. A little bit more about the drought. Let me go back to that. Something interesting is that the water supply in the Canary Islands depends on a combination of groundwater and desalinated water. Desalination requires a lot of fossil fuels, which means that the issues on this island, which are being basically caused by human-caused climate change all over the world, are continuing to be perpetuated by, this process that allows them the resource that they need to live, a resource that is continually under strain from a very demanding economic product. Okay, so my project culminated in an article, a little mini podcast, which was fun. I'd never done that before. And I also wrote about local versus tourist culture on the island. It was crazy to see such discrepancies geographically and what happened where and why people went there. But ultimately, I'd like to conclude with something I wrote. I wrote this paragraph and I put it toward the end of my article. My article is called The Starving Place. The conquest by the Spanish is when the island's process of desertification began. Desertification refers to the land's change from fertile agrarian soil to arid, bare ground. It involves soil degradation and the loss of vegetation cover and biodiversity. During a hunger strike, the body responds to its lack of food by harvesting its own muscle and fat. This is what causes emaciation. Human activity on the Canary Islands has caused the land to change, deteriorate, and slowly fail to sustain life as its nutrients deplete. There is no foreseeable way to abandon course. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking my picture. My name is Zaya. I'm a climate journalist who's studying climate change at Yale University at the moment. This summer, I directed my documentary on climate change in Mongolia. I grew up there, but I spent most of my adult life in the US studying climate change and the environment, but I realized that I hadn't really looked back to see what was really going on in my home country. And Mongolia holds many stories that doesn't get told internationally. And it turns out that I'm one of the very few climate journalists from Mongolia, so I felt that it was my responsibility to tell this story and perhaps bring that story to an international audience. So that's what I did over the summer. I directed this documentary called Herders at the Edge. It's a documentary on climate change, and it tells a story about how climate change affects not only just people's livelihoods, but also how it steals people's dreams. So let me show you the trailer of the documentary so that you know what I'm talking about. How do you play this? Okay.
Мөрөө жахаар дээр нэг нисэж байгаа мэдрэмж төрөөл. Наадмаар бүрдэндрийн төлөө оролдоод хурд хүчин сойгоол.
Нодныгаан болоод энэ үлзүүд болчихор ч одоо тэгэл Монгол мал төлөөнөөр дисэж хэдэн төлөв өгч штеп. Тэгээд шинжлэх суурьцсан. Сүүлийн хүүхдүүд яа. Тэг болж игэл олон малчин байгаасаа гэж би их хүсдэг юм. Сүүлийн үед ирсэн мал даргаах гэсэн хүүхд ирсэн байхan байчдаг. Наадам гэдэг үл ерөөсөө эдгээр төрчихсний сайхан баяр боловч цаа тутах нь онд нэг дэлгэсээ орж өгдөг шалах. Байгаль цагаагаар хооштой нэмээс дордно гэж эрдэмтэн судлаачдад үлд гаргаж байгаа нөхцөлд би л өөр хөвгтэй малчин болгоно гэж хэзээтгэж шүү.
So the synopsis of this film is, thank you. The synopsis of this film is pretty straightforward. It's climate change is happening 3 times faster than the global average in Mongolia. And Janska, who's the boy in this film, he dreams of becoming a racehorse trainer. Like he literally dreams of becoming a racehorse trainer. But his uncle, Amra, the main character of my film, he doesn't want to encourage this path because deep down he knows that climate change is going to ruin it for him in the future. So that's what the film is about. And that's what I mean when I say climate change steals people's dreams in certain cultures. And I really wanted this family to kind of serve as a microcosm and portray the overall struggles that most herding families in Mongolia are going through. So I picked the pieces that were most common among the herding community struggles that were most common. And yeah, and it happened. And I really wanted this film to offer a perspective on the cultural erosion that's been going on for a long time. So I hope that the film did that. You guys can watch it if you want. At the end, you guys can reach out to me if you want. So to do that, I went to Bayanghongor province in Mongolia. It's about a 14-hour drive from the capital city, which is where I used to live. And I spent 10 weeks on this project. And now the film is out. It's about 20 minutes long, and it's in 2 languages. So the Mongolian version of the film is being broadcast almost every day on Tinger TV, which is a national news broadcaster in Mongolia. And we also held the premiere last month at Yale University. And next month, we're holding a private screening at Google for their engineers. And we also held a screening at a conference in Mongolia for over 700 people. So there's something to be said about the lifestyle in Mongolia. The herding lifestyle that's common in Mongolia is actually the result of living in a very unstable environment for a very long time. Climate in Mongolia is already very erratic. People often joke that you can experience 4 seasons within a day. And I stand by that testimony, like it's true. And so it's really a lifestyle that is designed to deal with crisis and change. And as Charles Darwin famously said, like it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent ones. It's actually the most adaptable one that survives to change. So it's really true in the case of the Mongolian herding culture. It's been around for more than 2,000 years. But the most adaptable lifestyle that we have in Mongolia is now being threatened because of climate change. And that's what I wanted to tell. That's why I wanted to tell this story. But it turns out that this quote is actually applicable to filmmakers as well. I went into documentary filmmaking thinking that a director's job is to like have control over everything. But it turns out that it's mostly about adapting to crisis. Because every week there was a crisis. And when I say crisis, like I really mean it. This is what the Mongolian traditional dwelling, it's called gir. This is how gir looks like. And that's how the interior walls look like. So one night, when we were still sleeping inside the gir, a bull charged straight into it and smashed 2 of the walls. And that's just one of the disasters that we have had to deal with almost every single day. And every week brought new disasters, and it was fun. And schedule-wise, we were basically following Amra's schedule, the main character of the film. So Amra would be waking up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at midnight. And that is also a reflection of like how climate change was affecting his life. He was working all the time. He was overworking. And at the end of the filming trip, I lost about 7 pounds, which is, I'm trying to gain it back. But like that also meant that Amra didn't have time to do like an interview with us every day. But I really desperately needed those interviews. So on some days, I just decided to help him out by doing his chores. So, sorry. This is me shearing sheep for the first time in my life. A good herder would take about 5 minutes to shear 1 sheep. It took me half an hour. And I may have spent maybe 3 hours shearing 5 sheep that day, but it gave me the 30 minutes that I desperately needed to do an interview with Amra. And Amra really appreciated the intention of my help, if not the outcome. So it also brought us really close together. At one point, Amra started telling me stories about how, about his favorite uncle, very personal stories when I wasn't even asking questions. So that also showed me how, we built a very good connection there, and I really appreciate it. But besides that, I'm pretty sure that the sheep was like, "What are you doing, woman?" So it was also a journey where I, perhaps for the first time in my life, where I truly realized that my culture is slowly but surely dying. And I hope that by telling stories like this, maybe we can perhaps preserve it for as long as possible. And I'm really grateful for the Pulitzer Center, Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and Yale School of the Environment for funding this film. It's literally one of the very few films on climate change in Mongolia that is directed by a Mongolian filmmaker. So thank you.
Thank you to all of our presenters. And as is customary, are there any questions that the panelists have for one another? And then we'll turn it over to the audience.
Is it on? so many questions, but my first one is, what is a river island, and like what's its ecological like significance or meaning?
That's a really good question. So Majuli is the largest river island in the world. Basically, it's right next to the land that is Assam. Assam is a landlocked state. However, Majuli is detached from, so basically the Brahmaputra River goes through Assam, right? So within the river, there's an island in the middle, and that is Majuli. And ecologically, basically, it is a tropical state, tropical island, and again, it produces rice paddy fields, and it's a very wet region, but essentially it's shrinking every single day because of flood erosion.
I had a question for you, Zaya. In my project, when I was speaking with people, I also received a lot of reports of cultural erosion, not only as climate change worsens, but as the generations continue to come. I was wondering what sort of cultural erosion you witnessed and how you spoke to young people as well as maybe older folks in the community you were visiting about it.
Yeah, I sort of wanted to portray the cultural erosion through horse racing, which is a thing that's been passed down through generations in Mongolia, and it's like there's a card in my film where it says 13 stallions raced during this Naram festival this year, but 30 years ago it was more than 50. So that's how drastically it changed over time. So it's just one of the examples of like how cultural erosion was going on in Mongolia. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any questions in our audience? All the way back here. And just say your name and your school.
Hi, I'm Srijan from Northwestern. First off, thank you for the panel. It was so interesting to see all of your projects. This goes to all of you, and it's about reporting not just about climate, but climate in the global south, and also communities that are often very isolated or not talked about, even regionally in these cases, right? What was your process of not just getting into those communities, but getting into them as someone from the West, convincing them into the essence of the story? And also were there any experiences of you blending into the culture that gave you more insights that didn't? Especially I'm very interested about the horse riding part, because I was also in a very similar village during one of my reporting, and I got to ride horses with the locals. So if there's any experiences, I'd love to hear that too.
I can speak on this a little bit because I definitely was coming in as an outsider, as I'm not Nepali. And I think that one thing that kind of allowed me to inherently gain trust and build connections was just the means in which I was reporting. I was with these two female guides from the group that I was originally filming with, and we were together pretty much 24/7 and having little sleepovers every night in the tea houses along the way. And I think it took me, when I first started trekking, I wanted to immediately be recording everything and interviewing everyone. And I very quickly learned that I wasn't going to be able to get people to open up by doing that. And so just waiting days to take out my camera or to do more proper interviews with my guides or the people that they were connecting me with really helped. And I was definitely aware that I was an outsider there, and not to come in this parachute reporting manner and just hear all these stories and then leave, but try to really understand what people were telling me about. And having my connection with the mountaineering industry, I think, helped too, because while I couldn't relate culturally, I could bring in my own experience growing up in the mountains.
If it's okay, I'd like to respond to this one too, because I actually felt guilty at the start of my project, visiting a place that was experiencing tourism-related strain as an American tourist. The guy at the airport day one, when I ordered my coffee, was like, "Buenas vacaciones!" And I was like, oh, goodness gracious. But what I learned from my sort of unique and almost problematic positionality there was that, the Canary Islands has always, and I've heard this from many different people that invited me to dinner, that introduced me to their family, that took me to their places of work, that the Canary Islands has always been a place that has had a typical Spanish hospitality and has always welcomed visitors and, formed close bonds with neighbors and different communities. It's really the model of tourism that they're critiquing. So I don't know. It was really, I definitely wanted to move forward with kindness. And I think making sure to ask good questions and not assume anything was important. And I was also able to do most of my interviews in Spanish, which other panelists have spoken to as well.
I just want to quickly add that for the missing community, they're very reluctant to speak to outsiders. In fact, they have like a chief that you kind of go to when it comes to answering kind of controversial and difficult questions. So in the first few days, no one was really talking to me, but then ultimately I did get to enter one of their houses and, just have a glass of water with them and talk. One thing I'll say though, for accessing these communities, especially if you have no connections, I just kind of cold called it and I would just ask anyone on the street, like, hey, do you know of a school that's being affected by floods? And I was surprised how effective that was.
Question?
Hello, my name is Nia from Hampton University. My question is for Brigid. So did you encounter, I know you talked about like the negative effects of tourism, but did you encounter anybody that saw any positive effects or benefited from tourism, like whether that be jobs or like anything that they were providing to tourist locations?
That's a really good question and one I struggled with in terms of nuance at the beginning of my pre-research. It's really hard to look at a country's, or a region in this case, a region's main economic products. Tourism is more than 35% of the GDP of the Canary Islands. And think about how that economic product could possibly have a negative economic effect on its people. But what I found is that, and I sort of mentioned this, rent has increased while salaries have stagnated. So while economic activity has not gone down, and actually tourism post-COVID, the numbers have never been bigger in terms of tourist arrivals, but that sort of economic activity is not having a positive impact on the everyday life of the folks living there, which is really heartbreaking. And the people that are employed, and this is something I didn't really get into in my article because it wasn't really a focus and I didn't do enough research on it, but people that are employed by tourist like complexes can't afford to live, so they often live in shanty towns or in caves around these tourist developments, and it's really inhumane and really sad. A lot of people, though, are acknowledging that this is a problem, so I do think there's hope for change in the next couple decades. Thank you for your question.
Hello, Jaquel Spearman, Houston Tilson University. I have a question for Brigid. You actually mentioned rewilding, which I found really interesting. Due to I believe restorative the process. So could you go a little more detail about that?
You mean me, not Brigid?
Yeah, I was like, I don't know how to speak about that.
You're curious about rewilding as a process?
Yes, could you go a little more in detail about that?
Sure, yeah. It's an extremely controversial term, and so a lot of people, even the Broughton Hall people, were hesitant to call their process rewilding, but it started in 2000 when a similar estate decided to completely transform the intensive grazing processes and just kind of put nature back in the driver's seat. So that just means acknowledging that human activity has completely degraded the land in England, and they're trying to think of ways to reincorporate natural processes without being so intensively involved. It's kind of we're going to start the process and then just sort of take our hands off or readjust as we need to without controlling the whole thing. So early succession tree plantings or ecosystem engineers like beavers, they recognize that they don't know how the process or what the outcome will be, but they know that the land is kind of devoid of these ecosystem engineers. So they're just trying to bring that back in a way that heals the land, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, no,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Hi guys, I'm Jen, Syracuse University. So my question was for everyone that did like documentary and visual work alongside their reporting, and my question was like if you could speak on like any struggles that you experienced if you worked alone, or how working with other people while you're reporting these stories to produce like video as well, and like kind of what that looked like how did you report and do like camera work and all this stuff at the same time? Was there struggles? What did that look like? Thank you.
For me, it was quite easy because I worked with someone I used to work with before. So he took a week leave from work to work with me on that. And yeah, it was great. So he handled the camera work to film. And I just, I was there doing the other things while he was like taking B-rolls and stuff. So I was recording because I had a Zoom recorder as well for audio. So I was doing that for radio and podcast while he was, taking B-rolls and all of that. So yeah, it was really good. And the driver as well, I also used someone I'm familiar with. So yeah, it was really good, working with people that you already know. And yeah, it just made the work very, very smooth.
Hello. I had a film crew. I had a cameraman and an assistant cameraman, so they were very helpful. I was also filming myself too, but like I can't carry a big camera. Just look at me. So I was recording mainly with an Osmo in 4K. So that's what I did. And the entire project, like I said, it took 10 weeks, and I filmed for 2 weeks in the countryside and came back and edited the film. So which means I had about 5 to 6 weeks to edit the film, and which seemed like a long time, but everybody's been telling me that it's a very short time to produce a documentary. Maybe it is, but I come from a background in TV, so it's a very fast-paced environment. So I got used to doing things very quickly, so 5 weeks seemed like a very long time for me. Yeah, so hire a crew, I guess.
I think my biggest challenge with filming was that I was hiking at the same time, and so I wasn't only carrying all my gear on my back, but I had like this camera around my neck, and both was very physically exhausted every day, but was constantly in my head running through my stories. And I kind of had these two buckets in my head. One was the climate story and one was the female story. And I had decided before even coming to Nepal which mediums were going to be which. And so I was constantly thinking is whatever I'm filming right now, is this going to be for the female story? And in that case, I'm doing video. And it was also just me, so trying to cover bases of coverage and B-roll, and what I was interviewing, when I was speaking to people, what if that was going to be filmed? And then if it was for my climate story, I was just focusing on still photography and it's going to be written. So I think having that decided beforehand was helpful, but it was definitely all mentally and physically exhausting doing that at the same time. But I really enjoyed it as a challenge.
Hi, I'm Kim, a graduate from UChicago. I have two separate questions for two different people. So first is for Dali. Great story. I was curious about your pitching process because you were going to write you were going to prepare stories for different outlets. Could you talk a bit more about did you reuse material between different outlets? Was there overlap, or did you find unique narratives, or maybe told the same story in different formats? And my second question is for Jess. Your story I felt was really complicated. We've often heard the same narrative of climate change is coming, it's really bad, so policies need to go straight ahead. But it seems like there's some cultural and historical baggage that herders were dealing with. So that narrative wasn't so straightforward. So do you have any tips for teasing out the thesis statement of like the entire story? How did you know that you nailed it while balancing the different tensions? Thank you.
All right. So for pitching, I immediately got the notification that I'm going to be reporting on this. I started to reach out to. I mean, before then, I actually got one. I mean, it was part of the pitching process as well. I got the TV station in Nigeria interested about it. They were like, "Oh yeah, they're going to use it for their environmental program." And at that point, I didn't know that they would need it for the entire episode, right? So when I went to Nigeria, I tried to meet with all of these media outlets. So when I met with them, they were like, "Okay, yeah, we actually need it for the entire program, right? 24 minutes, like 24, 25 minutes. It's a 30 minutes program, right?" I was like, "Oh, okay, I can do it." I mean, they know I can do it because I'd worked there before. That was my first job. And then, when I left, I worked with an international media organization. So they know that I can deliver, right? So that was it. And I think it was basically contacts. And I was able to also reach out to other media organizations, just sent emails to them, and they all responded. They were like, "Oh yeah, let's meet up." And so I did like a Zoom meeting with each of them, and they told me, yeah, they're interested in this and all of that. So that was how I was able to get them on board. I remember also going to London to pitch to my editors, but I mean something happened, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, I mean because it's funded, right?" And looking at editorial independence on their own part, they just felt like, "Okay, yeah, this would be maybe another time, but not this time," because that was it. I think for me it was basically the contacts that I have, and being able to convince them, tell them about the story, and then getting them interested in it. And they were like, "Yeah, okay, we're gonna do it." Right now, it's I'm gonna resume working on the project again like next month, because the first draft of the first one is ready for the 24 minutes report is ready. So I'm going to work more on it next month. That's basically it. But then it's not going to be the same across board, because it's different formats. So different kind of storytelling. So what I'm going to put in the 5 minutes report is not going to be the same. For the 24 minutes, so it's just going to be like, okay, what am I highlighting in this shorter version? You understand? So that's basically it. So it's not going to be all the same. Yeah. Thank you.
I love this question because it was something that I was thinking about a lot while I was there, and also now that I'm thinking about how to produce it. I think it is really complex, and when I was younger, like in high school, learning about climate change, and even through like my undergrad, I felt like it was a really black and white issue. Like, do whatever you can to sort of fix or like stop climate change, or do whatever you need to do. But now that I'm, I guess, a journalist, and I'm more interested in like complexities and those interesting kind of intersections, I'm realizing how important culture is to, like, it can't be lost in the name of climate change, I don't think. To find the thesis, I guess what I realized towards the end of the reporting is ultimately it's really, and this is something that I try to trace as I continue to do work in other areas, but like I try to find the source of power in the story. Like, the farmers were doing such intensive grazing that was degrading the landscape because the government was subsidizing that practice, and now they are being sort of left in the lurch because the government has changed the subsidy scheme. And so thinking about kind of, and like the dynamic between these like wealthy landowners who kind of have the resources to rewild versus the small family sheep farmers who are kind of just trying to catch up every day and doing these long work hours. I think trying to tease out like where that source of power is and where like the powerlessness is, and is where I was trying to find the story, rather than saying like sheep farmers are doing intensive grazing and that is bad. So there was one other thing that I was thinking about, but I don't know what it is, so sorry.
Thank you. I'm Katarina from San Diego State University. I just first want to say all of your stories are so impressive and really inspiring to me, so congrats on all your work. My question was specifically for Zaya. I was really fascinated by how you focused in on one family and really made them the core of your story. And I wanted to ask you about what that was like to really become intimate with one smaller narrative, whereas usually news stories have like all these different sources and stuff. So what was it like to really hone in on them, and how do you think it benefited your story?
Yeah, that was very challenging actually. Because Amra kept telling me all these kinds of things that were all related to climate change. And some of them were not related to climate change, but I felt that they were all very important to tell. So it was very challenging for me to pick which parts to show. I think what I really focused on was I really wanted that story to be human-centered. I didn't want this story to be, a scientific climate change, like hardcore sit-in interviews. I didn't want to do that. So I really wanted to just focus on the human aspects of climate change and how, and show their emotions, basically, how they're struggling. And so that's what I wanted to do. But at the end of the day, like, Amra would be telling a very, touching story. And I was like, should I include this or should I not include this? Please help. And so I would like to thank like Micah Fink on that too, who's the who was that? Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Micah helped me to figure out like, which pieces to show and which ones are not really like appropriate for the film too. There was this one story where Amra was like, this horse race is really becoming a huge problem because we're also losing like Mongolian like horses, like Mongolian breeds, because there are hybrid horses, and like it all seemed like it was supposed to be part of the story too, because the story was about a horse race. And so I was like, I have to include this. But then we ended up taking it out. So it was a lot of processes, and I had like 3 drafts. It started with like 30 minutes, and then it became 25 and 20, and then became 18, and it was a lot of like small editing, which is why I guess documentary filmmaking takes such a long time. But yeah, it's just, you never know. When you go into documentary filmmaking, you just never know what it's gonna look like at the end, and it's such an evolutionary process. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Eder. I'm the fellow from Swarthmore. I had 2 questions. What do you see as a common through line between one another's projects, or even those from the first climate cohort? And second question is, what do you think your projects add to the global climate change narrative? Thank you.
I can speak to the first one because I've been so impressed by the breadth and depth of like all the climate reporting specifically that I've seen here. It's been so inspiring as someone who's been thinking about environmental journalism. I'd actually like to give a special shout out to Natalie, because your presentation on Puerto Rico from a couple days ago was so smart, and it made me think about a really global context for like insular communities such as the Canary Islands. I think that's something that we saw in Ananya's presentation today, Lauren's as well. Like, and this is sort of also getting at Shree's question before about like communities that are isolated and forgotten and therefore not only like disenfranchised, but also like oftentimes the ones that are the most affected by climate related impacts. So I don't know, it's been really cool to sort of draw that connective thread. I'm very inspired. Thanks to all of you.
Yep. And touching on that same question, I think another thing that I've noticed and has definitely been reiterated through everyone's presentations is the binaries that climate causes. And I noticed this on a smaller scale in Nepal, but there'll be flooding in one part of the country, and then not far away there's droughts. And I think that like in everyone's presentations we've seen this weekend, that is true as well. You'll see very different consequences. And also, I think that where a lot of these really heartbreaking effects of climate change are seen are often in the countries that aren't the big contributors to it. So I think that's been another theme that I've noticed.
Right, yeah, to the second one. We could see the devastating effect of climate change all over the world. And for my project, destruction of mangroves is not just peculiar to Nigeria, it's a global phenomenon, right? And, it happens everywhere. And I just felt like, telling this story in Lagos, for instance, it's also applicable elsewhere, but particularly the kind of unique place that Lagos is and what that would mean, for communities, for local communities. And that's why I feel like they need to, tell these stories and educate people, because basically most people that do not really believe in climate change is because they do not have the adequate education about it to understand what it is and the effects and how, human activity is also contributing to that. So I think, all of these projects contribute to, the global conversation, around climate change.
This will be our last question. Yes, thank you.
Scheherazade, faculty from Northwestern University in Qatar. This question is for you, Zaya, because I got a little bit from your presentation, a taste of the emotion involved. And we speak a lot in journalism schools about evidence-based storytelling, but I think a lot of the time we forget about emotion-based storytelling. And I could tell that you were very emotional, and I appreciated sharing the insights of this community with us. But at the same time, I wanted to know, with your close connection to the story, and again, I think this is why you struggled with what do I include? This is important to me, and all of this is important because these people are important and their story is important. So how did you grapple with that and also deal with the emotional aspect of this burden and responsibility of telling your people's story to the world?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I have to think about it for a month to answer that. Yeah, the emotional aspect was definitely challenging, but I think without the emotional part, this story wouldn't have come to life. It was very, the documentary filmmaking is really about connections, and you have to gain the trust of your, I don't like to call it a subject because, I don't know, I just don't like that word. But Amra was a great man. And I saw it the first time I met him, and I really trusted that he can be my main character. So that connection was there, and then we built the connection from there. I think the emotional part that you asked, I don't really know how to answer that question, because I'm still thinking about it, and I'm still reflecting on the post-production kind of phase. But I would say that I think it helped me to become a documentary filmmaker. I really enjoy that aspect, showing the emotional part. I don't think maybe it might have made me a biased, storyteller in some sense, because I am Mongolian and I really wanted to share that story. But I think it benefited the story more because I know the nuances of the culture and all that. So I would say that, but I would have to think about that question for a bit to answer that fully.
All right, thank you. Please applaud our panelists.